Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Shush! My name is Michael Stewart. This is Ralph Lord, just in case you don't know us. We have been deputed to lead on a guided tour of the village of Great Longstone. We have been chosen by a committee to do this. You can tell it's a committee because I come from Little Longstone and Ralph comes from Sheldon. And Ralph knows as much about Great Longstone as I do, and I know almost as much as he does. But what we're hoping is that all the Great Longstonians amongst you will tell us what you know. The house next door is now called York Cottage, but it was known as Ivy Cottage previously. But we do have an inventory of Mrs. James Furness. Furniture left at Ivy Cottage, February the 13th, 1888. And it's on both sides. It's quite a lengthy document. And it gives a sort of word picture of what a Victorian house looked like with all the clutter and everything else in it. One brass rod and crimmin curtain attached. What is crimmin? Presumably it's some kind of material. A coal vase. What a coal vase is, I don't know. Cretonne bed furniture. But how much of the house was in existence in 1888, I don't know. There have obviously been modern extensions there.
This extension is very new, this side, isn't it? 10, 15 years?
Yeah.
All this piece coming out.
The extension done.
So it's just the right angle bit that's the older bit.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, there's an entrance hall, a kitchen, a pantry and a sitting room downstairs. And upstairs there was a bedroom over the kitchen and a spare bedroom and a back room. And the back room had a lady's side saddle under the bed, which is an interesting place to put it. So that's a fairly late Victorian inventory of York Cottage. And the reason we have an inventory is because there was a law of the land which said that anyone who died owning an estate worth more than £5, an inventory had to be made of their estate, of their personal estate, of all the goods. And what would happen is that the neighbours would go into the deceased person's house and they would look at everything in the house and they would make a note of it and they would give a value to it. And these are very interesting documents because they tell us what people actually had. And there aren't any other documents which really do this. John Cooper is going to have say a few words about the Methodist Church.
The Methodist Church, we're celebrating 150th anniversary this week, in fact, and throughout this coming year. The chapel, minus a little extension on the end, was built in 1843, and previous to that, the meetings before the chapel was built were held in this small cottage here, where this part, I understand, was a stables where the pastor used to stable his horse to run the services in the very small cottage. It must have been quite a busy time, 1843, 1844, because the following year they built the chapel at Little Longstone in 1844, and of course their 150th next year. And from then on, of course, we've gone on from strength to strength. We are a little short of members, so if anybody hasn't got anything to do on a Sunday.
Well, in that cottage there were some very old stairs really. They were sort of stone, and it was sort of open plan. And the old lady who lived there, who would now be 100 years old, she told me the preacher used to stand on those steps and preach.
Ah.
Yes.
Ah. The reason we're standing here is because behind me is a house which has a date stone on it, and it says, if I remember rightly, MAF 1772. And we have the will of Martin Furness. He died on the 11th of October 1786, and he left to his son Peter a house, barn, stable, cow house and croft, and his field would go right back way beyond the cricket pitch. It would be a long narrow field, rather like a medieval field. The other interesting thing I think about this house is that in a commercial directory for 1857 there is reference to a tavern called Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the landlord was a man called William Blackwell, and in 1851 he lived in this house, and therefore I think that this was Uncle Tom's Cabin. But I'm not sure. This building here was once the old Harrow Public House, and then next door we have, as still, the White Lion. Again, if I can read you from the newspaper of 10th of January 1863, I will tell you about the old Harrow riot. On Sunday last, this usually quiet village was disturbed by 3 drunken fellows who had been employed on the new line of railway. About 11:30 p.m, they made a furious attack upon the old Harrow, when Mr. Oliver, the landlord, discharged his gun over their heads. This alarmed them for the time, and they separated, but were seen filling their pockets with stones for a second attack. Another shot, however, kept them at bay, and by this time the constables had arrived, so they thought discretion the better part of valour, and they skedaddled. These fellows call themselves navvies, but itinerant nuisance would be a more suitable appellation, for they roam about from place to place where railways and similar works are being constructed, and by their malpractices bring disgrace upon the whole body of men engaged. And that was the riot of the old Harrow. Once again, you see that we have a gable end to the road, and the gable end on the right was the smithy. The one on the left was a gig house. Thomas Gregory Orr used it to put his horse and cart in there. The buildings at the back is Victoria Terrace, and it's believed that they were built originally as weaving shops, because James Longstone had a cotton mill in Great Longstone. In the house which is now known as Longstone Lodge, but was once known as Mount Pleasant. It was a horse-driven cotton mill, but he used the weaving sheds at the back to do those tasks which could only be done by hand, because they were actually weaving fustian, which is a form of velveteen. Did you hear that? It wasn't actually a cotton mill, it was actually a fustian mill. Fustian is a form of velveteen. What always intrigues me is the house in front, because that, I think, is the most unusual looking house for a village. And there only seem to be 3 entrances, which means, was it only 3 houses? I have an idea it was more than that at one time. I have an idea there were 6 or 7 different dwellings in there. The door on the far right has been moved. That's an old photograph of the building, and you can see that the right-hand door and the window have been swapped round. You will notice, of course, that we have another one of the village pumps in front of the White Lion, and it disappeared very recently.
That's a shame.
Comparatively. 40 years ago.
Recently is only 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's only 40 years ago. That's nothing, is it? It's getting rather cold. Can I just say a quick word about Church Lady, because that is a very old house. It belonged to a William Naylor. It went to his grandson, also called William Naylor. It went to his grandson, called Thomas White. It went to his son, called Francis White, and he added the extension. The extension was already there, but he added a little bit further on, because if you look at the side to the right of the entrance, you can see that there's a straight line down in the wall to show where the addition was. What else have I got to say? There is also in the house a crook beam. There is a crook beam inside, which shows that once it was a timber-framed house. That's enough. It's getting too cold, isn't it? Anything else to say, Ralph?